1 John chapter 4, verse 8 says, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love." In John chapter 14, verse 6 says, "Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." For one of my classes, I had to read an article about Christians preaching to Muslims. The person who wrote the article explained that when they were being instructed on how to preach to Muslims, the person in charge said, "Don't mention that Jesus is the Son of God." The person writing the article got mad and said something like, "As Christians, we should be unashamed and unapologetic in our approach," meaning that instead of caring for the individual's personal beliefs, we should preach the truth no matter what. Now, I do agree with this position, but it made me wonder, how can we preach in perfect love and truth? How can you be completely loving and completely truthful? Most people would obviously say that to not tell the truth about Christ would be the least loving thing you could do. But I'm not talking about just telling the truth. I'm talking about telling the truth in a loving way. Let's say you went to an event for trans people and started shouting, "Everything here is a lie. Men cannot become women. All of you are sick and need Jesus." While that would all be truthful, is that being done in a loving manner? It all depends on how you look at it. The progressive Christian would say, no, you could never do something like that. In fact, it's much better to affirm the trans person because that would be loving. The traditional Christian would say, yes, you should say something like that, and you should say it loud and proud. The truth must be made known. Now, one of these is certainly more accurate. Obviously, affirming someone's sin is much worse than denouncing it. However, Christ didn't really behave exactly like this. There was one time in which people like to point to, or maybe want to ignore, where it appears that Jesus behaved in an unloving manner. That would be when he flipped the tables over in the temple. Jesus flipped those tables because the people in the temple were charging poor people more money to obtain a sacrifice. So, in the end, Jesus was being loving, right? But even still, a lot of people would look at someone flipping tables over and say, you should talk it out and not use violence. The reason I bring this moment up is, despite all the times Jesus was gentler than others, he was even harsher than others at times. He said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." That seems rather rude, right? He also said, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." That's pretty violent as well. But Jesus also said, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," that you should pray for your enemies, that we should forgive those who trespass against us. So what do we do? Which Jesus should we look to more? The loving one who forgives, or the Jesus of judgment and wrath? This dichotomy reminds me a lot about this Old Testament God versus New Testament God thing. It's silly to say that the God of the Old Testament is different from the God of the New Testament, because he's the same God. It's not an either or. You must come to accept that God is both loving and truthful in his nature. They are connected and neither can be denied. But this is not about questioning God. This is about questioning us. How can the imperfect human come to understand both love and truth perfectly? Because love cannot act independently of truth, nor can truth act independently of love. But we try to do this anyway. The progressive Christian may display some truth when they care for the trans person. In the same way, the traditional Christian may display some love in the process of telling the truth. Throughout the time spent writing this, it appears to me that we cannot display both love and truth perfectly. In fact, it's even hard to do it imperfectly. But there is a way to do it. I'm just not sure of it yet. Perhaps I'll never figure it out. Telling people the truth and telling people about Christ is supposed to be met with vitriol and disdain. But this can also be self-inflicted. People want the Jesus of the Conservative Party, or the Jesus of the Liberal Party. But that Jesus is nothing more than a product of man. He's not a socialist and he's not a capitalist. He does not affirm sin, but he will cover it. I don't know. This is an impossible task for me. I cannot understand how to love perfectly, so I will not be able to tell the truth perfectly either. But both truth and love exist, and God has defined them well enough for our finite minds to understand. We must learn, with the help of God, to not become affirming of sin, or to become pridefully judgmental of it either. It's not our place to judge, but it's certainly not our place to ignore. I guess the final way of looking at it is this. Tell people about Christ. They can either accept him or deny him. Do not sacrifice the truth, but do not beat people with it either. When sin enters the church, deal with it swiftly. Do not ignore or justify it. Finally, see the log in your own eye. I believe that in seeing your own hypocrisy, you will better understand the hypocrisy of others. In this way, you will be able to have grace and forgiveness, just like God has grace and forgiveness for you.